June 1944. The Florida heat shimmered over the tarmac of McDill Field, where B-17 Flying Fortresses and sleek P-51 Mustangs lined up under the relentless sun. To the casual eye, the men in khaki overalls working on the engines looked like any other ground crew, sweat streaking their foreheads as wrenches turned and rivet guns snapped. But a closer look revealed something startling. These weren't American mechanics at all. They were German prisoners of war, captured on battlefields in North Africa and Europe, now laboring in the heart of the United States. Each wore a patch marked PW on their backs, a quiet reminder of who they were and why they were here. The U.S. military faced a labor shortage. With millions of Americans overseas, the demand for aircraft maintenance was relentless. Planes returning from long patrols needed immediate work. Engines tuned, hydraulics checked, fuselages patched before they could take off again. The solution was as practical as it was astonishing. Employ German POWs strictly within the Geneva Convention rules. They were not permitted to build new aircraft or handle front-line munitions, but under supervision they could maintain, repair, and prepare non-combat systems that kept America's air fleet flying. For the prisoners, it was an encounter with an America they had never imagined. They had been told by propaganda that the United States was decadent, weak, incapable of sustaining a war on two oceans. Yet every hangar at McDill bristled with spare parts, precision tools, and endless supplies. To a German mechanic who had once struggled for a simple replacement bolt back in the Reich, it was like stepping into another world. But behind the routine of work, discipline, and relative calm, tensions simmered. Among the prisoners were not only mechanics and foot soldiers, but also hardline Nazi loyalists, men determined to resist captivity at any cost. The first weeks of their captivity at McDill unfolded with a strange mixture of routine and revelation. Guards escorted the prisoners from their barracks to the hangars each morning, rifles slung but rarely raised. To the Americans, these men were no longer enemies on a battlefield. They were laborers under watch, part of a grand logistical machine that kept bombers in the air and pilots alive. For the Germans, every step inside the hangars was a confrontation with industrial power beyond their imagination. Engines arrived from missions over the Gulf, battered and soot-stained. American officers calmly explained repair protocols in fluent German, many of them first- or second-generation immigrants who had grown up bilingual. The POWs marveled at the abundance. Spark plugs by the crate, hydraulic fluid in barrels, and tire replacement propellers lined up in storage racks. In the Reich, shortages had long been routine. Mechanics often salvaged parts from wrecked planes just to keep one fighter serviceable. Here, waste was treated as efficiency. If a tool dulled, it was replaced, not hoarded. Among the prisoners, some adjusted quickly, even eagerly. Skilled machinists treated their work with pride, knowing their craftsmanship ensured safety, even for enemy airmen. Others, however, remained silent and sullen. A particular figure stood out, Oberleutnant Dieter Klaus, once an officer of the Waffen-SS, captured in Tunisia. His sharp blue eyes followed everything with suspicion. To him, America's wealth was not impressive. It was a deception, a facade designed to break German will. He refused to assist in certain tasks, sneered at fellow prisoners who cooperated, and whispered warnings about betraying the fatherland. Yet even Klaus could not prevent others from noticing the truth. As days turned into weeks, the POW camp buzzed with quiet disbelief. America's strength was not a rumor. It was visible in every gleaming aircraft that lifted off the runway, engines purring after meticulous repair. By the way, if you're enjoying this deep dive into forgotten chapters of World War II, don't forget to hit subscribe and let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? I always love seeing the global community gather around these stories' life inside the camp, settled into a rhythm that seemed almost surreal given the war raging overseas. Breakfast in the mess hall, roll call under the Florida sun, then long shifts at the hangars. American guards often leaned casually against walls, their posture signaling confidence more than hostility. They carried rifles, yes, but rarely barked orders. To many of the German prisoners, this calm authority was as unsettling as it was liberating. They had grown accustomed to rigid discipline and fear. Here, the rules were firm but humane. The work itself offered its own revelations. German mechanics inspected Pratt and Whitney engines with an expertise born from years of Luftwaffe service. They recognized quality when they saw it. The machining tolerances, the seamless integration of parts, the sheer availability of replacements, all spoke to an industrial network working at a scale Germany could not match. One prisoner later wrote in his diary that America seemed to produce engines the way Germany produced rifles, endless, interchangeable, and precise. But beneath this rhythm, small cracks began to show. Klaus, the SS officer, became increasingly restless. At night in the barracks, he whispered to anyone willing to listen that escape was not only possible but a duty. He painted pictures of slipping into the Florida countryside, finding sympathetic German agents, and returning to the fight. Most dismissed his words as fantasies, but his intensity left some unsettled. American intelligence had long been aware of men like him. The Special Projects Division, tasked with monitoring POW morale, warned that hardline Nazis often tried to intimidate moderates. At McDill, these tensions simmered quietly like a hidden fuse. On the surface, prisoners were repairing aircraft and marveling at abundance. Beneath, one man's defiance was preparing to erupt into a dangerous gamble. The breaking point came one humid afternoon in August. The prisoners had been assigned to routine maintenance on a line of B-26 Marauders preparing for training flights. While most men focused on their tasks, Klaus lingered near the hangar doors, his eyes darting constantly toward the perimeter fence. He had studied guard rotations, memorized patrol patterns, even noted which sentries smoked during their shifts. To him, the camp was not a place of opportunity, but a cage that insulted his oath to the Reich. What he failed to grasp was that American security relied less on intimidation than on quiet efficiency. Fences were layered with barbed wire, towers placed to cover blind spots, and patrols rotated irregularly. Prisoners might believe they saw patterns, but those patterns were deliberately misleading. Still, Klaus convinced two younger men to join him. They believed his tales of German submarines lurking off the Gulf Coast, ready to spirit escapees home. The attempt unfolded just before dusk. As floodlights flickered on, Klaus and his followers slipped away from the hangar, ducking behind fuel trucks and stacks of spare tires. For a brief moment, freedom seemed within reach. But a sharp-eyed American corporal noticed movement where none should have been. A whistle pierced the evening air, guards raised rifles, and the camp erupted into motion. The chase was brief. Within minutes, the escapees were pinned against the wire, floodlights burning down on their pale faces. Klaus tried to rally his companions, shouting defiance in clipped German, but the reality was undeniable. There was no way out. Captured without a shot fired, they were dragged back under the stares of their fellow prisoners, some shaken, others quietly relieved. The escape had failed, but its consequences were only beginning. The aftermath of the escape attempt rippled through the camp like a shockwave. American authorities wasted no time tightening procedures. Spot checks became more frequent, searches of the barracks more thorough, and work details more closely monitored. Yet the guards avoided the brutality the prisoners might have expected. Discipline was firm but measured. The three escapees were separated from the general population, interrogated, and eventually transferred to a higher security facility. For most of the POWs, the message was clear. America's strength lay not in cruelty but in control. For many prisoners, Klaus's failure carried an almost symbolic weight. His defiance had collapsed under the very system he had mocked. In whispered conversations at night, men admitted relief that the SS officer was gone. Without his constant threats and sneers, they could work without fear of reprisal from fellow Germans. Slowly, the camp atmosphere shifted. The hangars once again rang with the rhythm of hammers, the hiss of welding torches, and the drone of engines tested after repair. Historians later noted that McDill Field's program mirrored a broader pattern across the United States. More than 370,000 German POWs were held in America between 1942 and 1946. Many were assigned agricultural or industrial work. Few attempted escape, and even fewer succeeded. The combination of humane treatment, overwhelming abundance, and the sheer impossibility of reaching friendly territory gradually eroded Nazi ideology. At McDill, the lesson was immediate. America could be merciful and watchful at the same time. As summer gave way to autumn, POWs watched squadrons of bombers thunder into the skies above Tampa, bound for training runs and eventual combat missions in Europe. They understood, perhaps better than most civilians, what that meant for the Reich. Every repaired aircraft was another nail in Germany's coffin. By winter of 1944, McDill Field had become more than a military installation. For the German prisoners held there, it was a window into a world that Nazi propaganda had insisted did not exist. They saw farmers driving their own trucks, workers eating lunches heavier than an officer's banquet in Berlin, and factories producing planes faster than the Reich could destroy them. America's power was not just military, it was systemic, woven into every acre of farmland and every assembly line. The failure of Klaus's escape underscored a larger truth. The old loyalty to Hitler and the SS held no future. What remained instead was survival, and with survival came exposure. Prisoners who once muttered about honor and resistance now talked of what they would do when the war ended. Some hoped to stay in America, drawn by its scale and freedom. Others dreamed of returning to Germany armed with new knowledge of machines, agriculture, or even democracy itself. The guards watched this shift with quiet satisfaction. They understood that victory was not only measured in battles won, but in minds changed. When the war finally ended in 1945, most of McDill's prisoners were sent back across the Atlantic. They returned to a homeland reduced to rubble, yet they carried with them an experience that many would never forget. They had lived inside the arsenal of democracy, had touched its machines, and had tasted its abundance. And they had seen one of their own, a hardened SS officer, brought low not by cruelty or violence, but by a system so vast and confident it could afford to be humane. At McDill Field, German POWs repaired American planes. But what they truly rebuilt was something far greater, an understanding that strength was not forged in tyranny but in freedom.